Welcome everyone to Tech Talk by Netranom, a podcast where you will learn tips and tricks on managing your IT. I'm your host Alena Atkins with my co-host Paul Page. Let's get started. Well, thank you again, Paul, for joining me today.
Well, thanks for inviting me again, Alena.
Of course, you are always invited. Yep. And we definitely want to give a shout out to our media manager, Davey Joe Kirkendall, who helps us record these podcasts. So before we get started, we are going to talk about an IT checklist for growing businesses. And I think this is going to be super important just to help growing businesses learn. As you're growing, you've got to make sure that your IT is on point. And there's a lot of different things, and it can kind of get overwhelming when it comes to making sure your IT is up and running as well as it can be when you're growing a business. So we're going to give you a checklist to let you guys figure out, okay, do we have this in place as we grow? But before we get started, Paul, what do you think about the new Cracker Barrel logo?
Okay, that's a great question to start off with here. I've not been to Cracker Barrel in several years, but
really,
I did see all of the news about that. And, honestly, the new logo just seems plain Jane to me. It doesn't seem, it doesn't have that flair and that country cooking feeling to it. It just seems very... I know it's supposed to have been aligned with their goals as a company, but it just seems too plain to me, to be honest.
I gotcha. Yeah. I will have to admit, I was kind of sad when I saw that they were changing. I just feel like there's a lot of nostalgia there. And
for sure. And they were talking about getting rid of the rocking chairs, and I think that's kind of a staple. Yeah.
Are you serious?
That they may be changing that as well, but,
that is so sad.
Things change. And as humans, we don't like change anyway.
No, we don't. Obviously, with everybody getting upset about this new logo change, you can tell that we don't like change. So, did not know about the rocking chairs. That's really sad.
There was talk about some other changes as well. Hopefully, they don't change any of the food, because I love the country cooking they have there. So,
wow.
We'll see how that goes now that they're getting a lot of feedback on the new logo. We'll see how that continues from this point.
Okay, well, back to IT. So when they start to grow, IT tends to get overlooked because they've got so many other things that they're focusing on.
For sure.
And we tend to not look at IT until something breaks. So from your perspective, what is the first thing that you think leaders should be looking at or be thinking about when it comes to scaling their technology?
Yeah, so a really good question. And we really want to think of this at the beginning. We talked in some of our previous podcasts where we talked about doing things like business impact analysis, IT roadmap. This is one of those instances where, you want to start scheduling and looking at your business process, making sure it's aligned with your goals, making sure technology is aligned with that as well. So an IT roadmap set from the beginning has to include those elements of scalability. You want to have that already in place before you get to a point when you realize, we ordered that server 3 years ago, but we didn't include enough hard drive space to expand for our growth and data. You want to make sure you're planning that IT roadmap to include your scalability. So if you're talking about business growth and you're looking at maybe a 20% growth, annually, you want to make sure that your data sizes can grow with that as well on your servers or your cloud infrastructure. So definitely planning beforehand, before you get to that scalability, is important. You'll want to do that, obviously, with all of your business analysis and things you do at the beginning when you start the company.
Yeah. I think that's so important that you mentioned, that's a proactive approach.
It is.
Is sitting down before you start to grow and seeing, in a sense, kind of in the future, we're wanting to grow, we're wanting to scale. And so this is what the technology roadmap does, is show you, hey, in 5 to 10 years, you want to be this big. well, this is what you should do to your technology now, or get this plan in place
exactly
for when that does happen.
Yeah, because if you consider in that example that I gave, consider that you spent $20,000 on this server. In 2 years, you've experienced 20% growth, and you don't have 20% growth that you can put on that server now. So the data's not going to be there. So you have to, it's going to be another expenditure that you didn't account for in your budget. So those kind of things we want to take a proactive approach, like you mentioned.
Yeah,
for sure.
Great. So as teams grow, user access, it becomes a bigger challenge, obviously. And what are some best practices that businesses should follow to make sure that the right people have the right access?
Yeah. So it's very important. That's a big part of our security is user access today. So we want to have a system where it's role-based access control, where we are giving those staff members or those employees only the access that they need.
Yeah.
We want to start with the minimum needed and then grow up from there. So if you've got someone, let's say a dealership that's a line mechanic, you don't want them having access to HR's QuickBooks,
right.
Payrolls, and vice versa. You don't want payroll being able to access technical manuals for the Chevrolet vehicles. So it's really important that you define those roles for all of your staff members and only give them that access. Now that access can be controlled in a lot of ways. Today's world, M365, Microsoft's, we have what's known as Azure AD, or now it's called Entra ID, which is essentially just the ability to give users the amount of access that they need, and only the amount of access they need. We don't want to give them full permissions, keys to the kingdom. We only want them to be able to get to those service manuals or those QuickBooks. So role-based access control is probably the biggest one that we need to work on today.
Great. So how do you recommend businesses handle, there's onboarding, but then there's also employees as they come and as they go.
Yeah.
How would you recommend that they handle access or trading off of these accesses that employees do have?
Yeah, so onboarding, offboarding, very important part of the IT world, because those actual people have access to data, emails, other information, could be proprietary information, other things in there, and we want to make sure that when a new staff member comes on board, that they're quickly onboarded, that they're able to get to the resources they need to, and vice versa. When that employee leaves, we want to make sure that their access is restricted or taken away so that they can't get to the things. You may have a disgruntled employee, so you want to make sure that they're not sending out emails on your behalf after that deadline. So it's real important. Some of the things that we want to take into consideration are timing. Timing is everything with user access. So, if you know that, Jeff is going to be leaving the company on Friday, you want to let your IT staff know, hey, we're going to be letting go of Jeff Friday, or he's taking a new position on Friday, and certain things have to take place. We need to have all of their emails forwarded to other persons. We need to shut off all of their access to the QuickBooks payroll or the service manuals. Right. A lot of things have to happen during that time. And, of course, we want to have policies in place. We want to have policies with HR and admin, like a checklist. So when it is time for someone to leave or come on board, that it's not missed. Because a lot of time what happens is you'll hire an employee, but HR doesn't let you know that they've hired them, so you've not given them appropriate permissions. You've not assigned them up for the training that they have to have. You've not given them access to the company files, things of that nature.
I think it's important too to note that as your business is growing, that you're going to see turnover. You're going to see, you're obviously expanding, so you're hiring new people. And then just naturally as a business grows and just is a business for so many years, you're going to end up letting go, or people are going to quit. And so making sure that you're giving access to the right people, but also onboarding and offboarding, especially when their last day is, if they decide to quit, or the day that they are terminated, that they lose access, or the day that they start, they gain access.
Yeah. And one of the things I didn't mention about user access that we need to consider as well is that you have to have use and abuse policies for your organization. You want to make sure that you're, obviously you're going to restrict their where they can go and what they can do, but you want to make sure that they have agreed to your policies and procedures for technology use at your organization. So that needs to be defined as well. I didn't mention that earlier.
Right.
But very important too.
Yeah.
Yes.
So let's talk about tools and infrastructure.
Mm-hmm.
So when a business is growing, how can they choose the right mix of tools without, kind of going overboard or bombarding their employees with different types of tools? How can they do that?
So there's kind of a catch-22 there. I truly believe that the end users, those that are going to be using those tools, they need to be included in that decision making for the tools that we're going to be using for the organization, right? So you want to have them involved with the demos when you're looking at products. Other things that you want to consider are the scalability of those products. You want to make sure that you're choosing a solution. Today's world, we're looking at cloud solutions a lot more often than we were 5 years ago. So you're wanting to look at those solutions. You want to make sure they're scalable. If you're expecting your organization to have 20% growth, you want to make sure your technology is going to grow that 20% as well.
Yeah.
So those things are all ones that you have to consider during that time.
Yeah, that's a great point. I didn't even consider that if your business is growing, so should the tools that you're using. They should have the capability to grow. So, Microsoft, for example, the capability of adding new users to it. That is a way. If you grow and you add more employees, you add 5 more employees, well, you can get 5 more user accounts with Microsoft. So it has that flexibility. I feel like our tools need to have that flexibility that if a business is growing, their tools should be growing as well.
That's right.
So
very true.
Are there any common mistakes you see companies make when they're upgrading or when they're adding new systems?
So the biggest one that I see, typically what we see is people are moving to a new application and then they're starting their training when they start to use that new application. Mm-hmm. What I would recommend is that they get their training before they migrate to the new application or the new technology. Yeah. You want to have that a proactive approach there as well. So they want to start learning that new application or that new process before they migrate to that new application or new process. So that way on day one, they're not, the learning curve is not there. They're trying to learn new stuff right then and still try to get their job done at the same time.
Gotcha.
So a little bit of training and stuff. Don't skip the training part of it for sure.
Right. And so with that, is there like a trial area, like before they put something live? Are they able, I'm assuming that they're able to be able to look into it before it goes live. How does that work?
Definitely. So again, like what we're talking about, we want those end users involved with selecting that application that they're going to use. And during that process, the reps are going to give them that opportunity to maybe look at their knowledge base, to look at their training, to make sure that that tool is going to do everything that their business process is going to require. That's what we want to make sure. So yes, in that regard, there will be the opportunity there. Say, we're going to move over to this new application starting October 1st. Well, September 1, we're going to start doing some training and learning how to do it. The new reps and the trainers are going to walk us through how to use this stuff. So on day 1, we know how to use it already.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's less downtime there because you actually...
And productivity loss. We don't want that.
Right. Especially when you're growing a business. I feel like you need productivity even more. Do. So any downtime, you're like, we got to fix that somehow.
Well, obviously, we've got good productivity if our business is growing, and we want to keep that moving forward.
Right. Yeah. Definitely don't want to hinder that. So we have talked in other podcasts about backups, BCDR, and continuity, business continuity. So what are, one of those things businesses, it's one of those things that businesses don't think about until it's too late about, oh shoot, I should have had this backup, but I didn't. Yes. So what do you think would be an effective backup and recovery strategy that helps scaling organizations?
So really, you want to get with a reputable company that's going to help you make that decision, because they're going to look at your growth projections. They're going to look at the amount of data you have now. They're going to kind of look and see how quickly that data is growing. And that will give them the forecast to essentially design a backup disaster recovery solution for you. So what we typically have, nowadays we want this hybrid cloud solution where we want local recovery options where we can get back up and running from local device and local backups. but have the cloud capability as well to recover from the cloud in the event that we have a site failure. We talked about that in our BCDR podcast we did not too long ago. So we want to make sure that we have those in place, that we've got a hybrid solution. Our data is in 3 different places, local, maybe 2 cloud locations, or another inter-site location, 3 places, hybrid cloud. And then also we want that to be immutable. So we want those to be protected from the malware, from the ransomware. So when we're doing our backups, we don't find out 6 months later when we go to recover from ransomware that our backups have been getting infected from 6 months ago, and we lose 6 months of productivity. So things like that we always take into consideration.
Right. Yeah, and that would be, I feel like, a very important mistake, or unfortunate, because like you said, you're planning, you're like, oh, I've done my backups, and then your backup has actually been hit with malware, and like you said, you've lost 6 months. Yep.
And so we're always doing, we always want automated backups. We don't want a lot of human intervention. They forget to run the backups Friday night. We lose all data since for that week, things like that. So we want it automated. And then we want tests done. We want to test that recovery solution to make sure that we can recover. And that helps us with our recovery time objective, our recovery point objectives that we talked about in that last podcast. Helps them make sure that they're on par for, hey, our business impact analysis shows the most we want to lose is 4 hours of work. We want to make sure that we're testing and reaching those goals as well with our recovery times.
Right. Yeah. And that's a great point that you mentioned too, is expecting some type of downtime. Like, no business is perfect. We're human. Something is going to happen.
It's technology.
Yes, it's technology. Something is going to happen where you are going to experience some type of downtime.
Yes.
And planning for that to happen, that if we have downtime, this is the maximum amount that we want to be down for.
Yes.
And how do we make sure that this is the maximum? Like you said, 4 hours, making sure that we are only down for 4 hours exactly.
Yep.
And putting a plan in place.
That's right.
To be able to have that be your maximum downtime. I think it's a great point as well.
And to bring it all together, Alena, when we're talking about the scalability of that solution, we want to make sure that it is scalable. Typically we're going to have a device like a server or appliance. We want to make sure it's got that 20% growth rate over five years, let's say.
Right.
So those kind of projections are what you want to look at with a backup disaster recovery solution too.
Great. Yeah. So let's talk compliance. When a business grows, that typically means that they are adding on some type of compliance. And we've said this multiple times in different podcasts, but compliances are growing. It's like businesses are growing.
They are.
So how can a business stay ahead of these growing compliances without slowing down their innovation?
Yeah, so it kind of, one of the first things you obviously have to do if you're under any regulations, whether it be FTC safeguards or you're working with the DoD or it's HIPAA or financial, PCI, any of that stuff, you want to designate your team. You want to have either your compliance officer, your privacy officers, or a team. You want them set up right away. You want them to start looking at what you're doing now and what your projections are going to look like in the future that you're going to be doing. Are we going to have more compliance requirements because we're deciding to do work with the DoD or working with DoD contracts? So designating that team early on is very important. So that's going to help you with that scalability. And then, of course, having someone that's a subject matter expert involved with that. If you're a compliance officer, they should have some familiarity with those requirements of those compliance requirements. So whether that be through some training or individual growth, that's for the organization to kind of decide. But they should have a working knowledge of what those compliance requirements are going to be and how that's going to affect their scalability, obviously, in the future.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, great advice.
And always doing risk assessments. Obviously, compliance requirements, you've got to, just like your backups, you're testing those backups, you need to be testing out that stuff as well.
Yeah. Exactly. Because you can lose time and money and just your brand,
you could lose contracts, you could lose reputation. There's all kinds of things that'll cause you problems there. So keeping up with those compliance requirements and making them part of your strategy is very important.
Right. It's a necessity.
And it's, like you said, it's growing. We're starting to see a lot more compliance throughout a lot more different industries. It's just the nature of the business now that, that threats are growing.
Yep, exactly. Threats are growing.
Ever
and
evolving.
Compliance. Yeah.
Almost exponentially now, Alena. It seems like these threats are coming out. I mean, we're seeing all the scams and everything. It's getting bad.
Right.
Yeah.
So in order for us to stop that, there has to be compliance, and that's why they're in place as well. So it might be kind of annoying to keep up with these compliances, but it's for your customers and your patients.
It is definitely a necessity nowadays.
Right. So the last question I have for you is, what is one IT checklist item that growing businesses, they can't afford to skip, and why?
So if I had to think about that, it's definitely going to be revolved around your users. So a lot of the things that we talk about nowadays is the security awareness training, user access. We talked about that today. User access is probably one of the most important things we need to kind of keep an eye on, because the reason I say that, if we have some sort of failure where somebody, a threat actor, is able to gain the credentials of one of those staff members, they would have the same keys to get to everything that user does, right? So making sure that user has only access to the resources that they need to have access, minimal amount necessary,
right?
The better off we're going to be in the event that we do have some sort of hijack or account takeover. Yeah. So user access, user security, user awareness training, kind of all boils around that user thing. So even in growing businesses and scaling businesses, we need to remember that our users are a big vulnerability, let's say it that way. And we want to make sure that they're properly trained to avoid some of those pitfalls that we see happening today.
Right. Well, those are all the questions I have for you, Paul.
That's it?
Yes, that's it. That's it. I know. Well, and I think it's great to mention too that if a company is growing right now and they haven't had an IT roadmap, a technology roadmap, or they haven't started with these, now is the best time more than ever. You know, I feel like you can still be a growing business and decide what you're going to do now, but also what you're going to do even in the future. That just because you're growing right now and you haven't had that opportunity or didn't have the knowledge to know that you needed to start a business impact analysis or a technology roadmap, that today they can start today.
Sure.
So.
Yeah. Paul? Very important, very important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for joining me today. And we will see you all at our next podcast.